Seeking Color by AbsoluteAnonymous. She had grown up amongst shades of grey. There was no talking, there was no smiling, there were only rocks. Rock farms didn't exist, obviously. Who would farm rocks? That was ridiculous. She had, however, grown up amongst rocks. There were only rocks. That part wasn't a lie. She had been born and raised on a depressingly barren settlement along with two sisters and her mom and dad. There, stones littered the cold, hard ground in lieu of grass and flowers, and the trees were dead and almost skeletal with their bare branches. The citizens had long ago rejected the help of the weather Pegasus, deeming it unnatural to have ponies that controlled the seasons, and instead leaving it up to fate. The sky must have been confused by this neglect, and ended up settling on a neutral, dull grayness that no pony ever cleared away. The sun never shone, the rain never fell, no plants could grow, and the land began to die, slowly but surely, until there was nothing left but the clouds in the skies. Grey, just like everything else. The community they had lived in firmly believed that the rejection of pride and arrogance, and in its acceptance of ideals such as humility and submission, and the Pie family had long ago rejected all of their worldly goods, surviving on just the barest necessities. Growing up, she had no toys or books or games, and they had never celebrated any but the most religious of holidays. Days were spent trying to keep the family farm going. Thriving would have been too much to ask for, so they ended up settling on just scraping by, a decision that suited their minimalistic lifestyle. She had never had a birthday before coming to Ponyville. She had never expected one or even noticed the absence, as her sisters before her had never had them either, and it never even occurred to any of them that a birthday might be a cause for celebration. In their family, growing older meant that you were expected to do more work. As the youngest, for a long time, she was considered too weak to be of much help with the chores, and so she spent her days trying to find amusement wherever she could. Even if she ended up spending the time moving around rocks for fun and trying to make shapes in the dirt with them, or sorting them into different piles based on what color they had. And then one day, there was an explosion. The barrier between magic and reality exploded, sending shockwaves of rippling color and light across the grey sky. It wasn't grey anymore. The clouds had been cleared for the first time in her memory, revealing the gorgeous sun and a streak of beautiful color dancing across the sky. At the tip of the trailing rainbow wake was what seemed to be a dot of cyan. She stood and glared in awe, completely oblivious to that her normally razor-straight mane had been utterly obliterated, and for the first time she felt that the corners of her mouth began to turn up into something like a smile. The shelf in the closet held a cupcake with a bite taken from it, a jar of liquid rainbow, a blurry photo, and a clutch of cyan feathers. To any pony else, this assortment of items might have seen as random trash, but to the pink earth pony, examining them, they were her most precious treasures. The cupcake had vanilla frosting, and it was filled with her favorite hot sauce. She had given it to Rainbow Dash a few days ago as a joke, who would have taken a single bite before smiled faintly, eyeing it affectionately as she held it. "I suppose some pony just can't handle the spicy stuff. Oh well." She pushed it back onto its shelf and took up the jar of rainbow. She had stolen it when Rainbow Dash had given them the tour of Cloudsdale at the Best Young Flyers competition. When no pony was looking, she had secretly filled the jar so that she could take some out of it and back home with her. She wanted to always have her own personal rainbow to brighten up her life with, but then she thought she saw Rainbow Dash notice her sneaking the sample and panicked, pretending that she was trying to taste it, even though she knew how spicy rainbows were supposed to be. Luckily, the others had just written it off as her being random again, and no pony saw her slip a jar of stolen color into her pocket. The photo was one that she'd managed to snap in secret while Rainbow Dash was out flying one day. It was blurry because it's almost impossible to get a good action shot of the Pegasus, since she's just flying at such impossible speeds. It had depressed her, and and she had begun to practice running such that she could try and keep up with her someday. The thought of being unable to run alongside her made her want to sing. She knew she could never fly with her, as much as she wanted to, but that's okay. She'd take whatever she could get. The feathers had been gathered from all around town. Rainbow Dash was always crashing into things and losing feathers, and Pinkie Pie always found them afterwards. No pony ever noticed her sneaking them. No pony ever questioned why she didn't leave the feathers everywhere in the way the other Pegasi did. The memory of Rainbow Dash's scent was so strong that she could swear that it still seemed to cling to the feathers, even after she'd lost them. If she'd asked any pony else, they would have said it was impossible. But then, how did they explain the scent? It was fresh, like grass and rain and clear air. It was so different from the cloying sweetness of that permeated the sugar cube corner. The scent of chocolate and sugar and warm bread tended to be so thick in the bakery that it made her gag whenever she paused to think about it too long. She closed her eyes and smiled, absent-mindedly stroking the feathers she held. They were so soft, just like Dashy's wings. And if her eyes were shut, she could pretend that they really were her wings. These were her treasures. One cold, clear night, long after she'd come to live in the sugar cube corner, she had been sitting by her bedroom window and gazing at the stars. The streets had been empty, lit only by the glow of Luna's silver moon, and then she'd seen that now familiar bolt of color, trailing a shimmering rainbow in the air. She hadn't even thought about it at the time. As soon as she saw that rainbow, she practically threw herself out the window and began to chase that precious color, following the trail to its source. And there she was, a Pegasus, the color of her precious sky, and with a shock of multicolored hair perched on a cloud, eyes shut in sleep. That had been the first time she truly saw her. Her first instinct was to wake her up and introduce herself, but as she approached the sleeping Pegasus, she was struck by a sudden terror, and she fled. Since that very first almost meeting, she just knew that it must have been her. When she'd seen her very first rainbow all those years ago, she could have sworn that she saw a Pegasus leaving the rainbow wake behind her, but she'd never been sure. And surely, only some pony composed of sky and cloud and color the way Rainbow Dash was could have done something like the sonic rainbow at a competition, and the competition confirmed it. The shockwave of color was identical to the one she'd seen when she was just a little filly. Rainbow Dash had given her a reason to smile. Her Dashie had brightened up her desperate existence, and she would forever be grateful to her for that. No pony else knew that she kept these memories. Every night, when she was all alone, and knew that no pony else was awake, she would sneak into the basement of the bakery, and into the hidden back room where she locked these treasures away. There was only one who knew this room even existed. It was the biggest secret she had, and she didn't want to risk revealing it to any of her friends, as much as she loved them all in their own way. They wouldn't understand how important these items were to her. They would just laugh at her, or find it creepy and weird, and another sign of the instability they seemed so determined to find in her, or dismiss it as her being unfathomable again before forgetting all about it. And for some reason, the idea of these feelings being dismissed as unimportant was even more unbearable than the idea of being rejected because of them, because she had never felt anything more important in her entire life. Some nights, the happier nights, when she'd had a day of Rainbow Dash and pranking and fun and partying, the memory of lingering joy would still reside with her. And then she would wake up and sneak down to her private room, and she would sit amongst her treasures, smiling and dreaming. Some nights, the sadder nights, when she'd had an especially lonely day for whatever reason, she would wake up and sneak down to her private room and cry and cry and cry, tears rolling down her cheeks and great heaving sobs breaking free against her will. She never woke up any pony. The room was so hidden away that no one heard her cry. Sometimes she wished that they did, so that they'd come down and ask what was wrong, but that never happened. She cried because she knew that as much as she wanted it, this was something that she could never have. As much as her heart ached for her dearest friend in the whole world, she knew that she would never, ever be able to confess how she really felt. and that she would never ever be with her. And for a very simple reason. Eventually, even on the happier nights, a time would come where she couldn't bear to be around Rainbow Dash anymore, and she would have to leave the room where she kept her fragments of her. She was always back in her bedroom by sunrise. She would step inside and close the door, brush the hair from her eyes, and wipe the streaks of tears from her face, hoping her eyes wouldn't be puffy in the morning. It wouldn't be due for any pony to notice that she had been crying. And like every other night, she approached the mirror. She pressed her hooves against glass, touching her reflection and sighing in resignation, breath fogging up the mirror as she pressed her forehead against it. She pulled back, wiping away at the fog, and got a good look at herself. Long, straight pink mane shrouded her face, dull, expressionless blue eyes with a far-off look in them. Something like a grimace written onto her mouth as she stared at herself in this stony silence. Every night ended this way, and every morning began this way. Pinkamena turned away and returned to bed. She wrapped herself in the thick comforter as tightly as possible before closing her eyes. "My shift's almost over," she thought with a weak attempt at a smile. They both wanted nothing more than to be happy. It was just Pinkamena had lived a childhood of bleak depression and didn't know how to be happy. And life couldn't be all smiles all the time, yet Pinky didn't know how to be sad. The way things were now was for the best. Pinky was for the day, happy and bouncing and full of song and cheer, spreading love and joy to all ponies in town. But at night, Pinkamena would slip out for a few hours of quiet freedom and reflection, and if things were ever growing too frightening or upsetting or confusing for her to alter during the daytime hours, then it was Pinkamena's job to take back the reins to spare her. And nothing was more confusing than a love like this. She was strong, though. She could handle it. It was okay. But she knew the truth. And the truth was that as long as she was pushed aside and forgotten, she would never be able to be with Rainbow Dash. Her job was to protect Pinky from complicated feelings like this, and she couldn't just go ahead and screw everything up between her and Rainbow Dash for her selfish whims. She would have to keep them to herself. Pinkamena was the ghost that Pinky laughed at to keep at bay. She barely understood who Pinkamena was, or that Pinky had only manifested because Pinkamena needed her. She had accepted that a long time ago. In the morning, when Pinkie Pie woke up with a spring in her step, and Pinkamena was back in the corner, forgotten and alone, she would only have the faintest memory of what happened last night. Maybe she would have a sudden desire to find Rainbow Dash for a day of pranking, or maybe she'd throw a spontaneous party for her best friend. Maybe the lingering affection would manifest in some other, wildly unpredictable way. The same way that when Pinkamena woke up at night, she would still feel the lingering joy from Pinkie Pie's happiness, joy that she would never be able to feel otherwise. Pinky would never have the faintest idea what Pinkamena did at night, because it was her job to keep her happiness safe from troubling emotions like that. She was like her bodyguard in a way, a knight in shining armor, but without the armor, or a physical body of her own. As long as Pinky had her day, Pinkamena would have her night. And even though she knew that she would never be able to confess her feelings, that she had to bear the sudden burden of them alone for Pinky's sake, she would still have her dreams, and her memories of color, and of the time she could smile. The end.